My long-distance girlfriend asked me to take out a loan of $300,000 to help pay for her hospital bills. When I rushed to see her, I received the heartbreaking news that she had passed away. To repay the debt, I had no choice but to become a driver for a wealthy heiress. Unexpectedly, I encountered my girlfriend, who had come back to life, snuggled up to her boyfriend while trying on a ring. How dare a deadbeat come to a jewelry store? I stopped the salesperson who was about to approach them and smiled, advising, "Notify all stores worldwide that this couple is our important customers. Don't sell them anything under $1 million. Ding. Story Shots reminds you to click the subscribe button at the bottom right corner to read the full novel. After graduating from college, my girlfriend Celia Saunders applied for graduate school while I entered the workforce. We maintained a long-distance relationship for 3 years, and I saved every penny, waiting for her to graduate and come to my city so I could provide her with a more stable start. However, just a few months before her graduation, Celia was suddenly diagnosed with thyroid cancer. Celia's parents had to sell their house to raise funds, but unfortunately, it wasn't selling. In a panic, I took out a loan of $300,000 and contributed my savings of $200,000 to help her. But when I rushed to the city where Celia was staying half a month later, I received the tragic news that she had passed away. Celia's parents were heartbroken and refused to see me or tell me where she was buried. They said over the phone, "Alvin, Celia hoped you would forget her and start your new life. Just let her rest in peace." Her graduate school advisor coldly advised me, "Why be so stubborn? Let it go." I knew the Saunders family was grieving too, so I swallowed my concerns about the $500,000 loan. However, 6 months later, when I sought out the Saunders family to discuss it again, the neighbors told me they had already moved away. I couldn't contact anyone from the Saunders family, and Celia was gone without a trace. That day, I smoked an entire pack of cigarettes outside Celia's building. I initially comforted myself, thinking that spending money on her treatment was the right thing to do since we loved each other. But a few months later, my mother suddenly fell ill. Faced with high medical bills, I was at a loss, burdened by loans, and no bank was willing to lend me money anymore. This medication has minimal side effects, but it's quite expensive. "Mr. Harris, which one do you prefer?" The nurse had asked me several times, and I hesitated. "Son, just go for the cheaper one. I've been lucky enough to see you grow up." My mother's face was pale, and she was too weak to speak. I held her hand but couldn't say a word. The day my mother passed away, she handed me a jade pendant. "Call me Mom one last time after I'm gone. You should go find your family. Mom, if you leave, then I won't have any family left." I cried uncontrollably at her bedside, but my mother smiled and closed her eyes. I only regretted that I couldn't ease her suffering or let her leave peacefully. Fate is truly cruel. The collection agency called my workplace, and my boss, fearing trouble, urged me to resign immediately. I pleaded with him for a chance, assuring him that I would repay the money slowly. He pulled out the leave request I had submitted to care for my mother, saying that my frequent absences had affected the company's progress. In his eyes, I was like a tumor, and he would do anything to get rid of me. All of this was because I was in debt. Treating Celia and my mother had drained me financially, and now losing my job was just adding insult to injury. Suddenly, I remembered that a former colleague had posted a job ad for a driver in the group chat, joking that being a designer was less lucrative than driving for a wealthy family. I searched the job listings and found someone offering a salary of $25,000 a month. But the job requirements were quite strict. Beyond being able to drive, they also required a certain level of education and appearance. If I could land this job, I could repay my loans within a year and make a comeback. I contacted the company for an interview. The interviewer carefully reviewed my resume and scrutinized me. "This position is for a driver for a wealthy young lady. Children from rich families can be quite difficult to handle. Their previous drivers have been replaced several times." The interviewer paused and stared at me, and I understood the implications of her words. How hard could it be to manage a young girl? She would likely just be a bit spoiled. I immediately replied, I won't retaliate or argue back. The interviewer laughed. It's true that people with your background rarely apply for driver positions. Just give it a try. If the employer is satisfied, we'll sign a formal contract. I eagerly agreed, even going to the mall to buy a new white shirt. The wealthy heiress Janie Gill was studying at a university in the city, and my main job was to drive her to and from her villa in the suburbs. On the first day of picking her up from school, I made an effort to present myself neatly to leave a good impression. Groups of students streamed out of the school gate. I spotted Janie right away. She was surrounded by a few chatty girls, but her expression was blank, making her stand out in the crowd. I waved at her, but her expression didn't change. The girls around me were excitedly tugging at her arm, asking who I was. I stepped forward, trying to appear gracious and composed. I'm the new driver, Alvin Harris. Are you Ms. Gill? Seriously, Janie, do you have to have a good-looking driver in your family? We really can't imagine the life of a rich young lady. Her two classmates laughed and joked, while Janie Gill looked at me, momentarily stunned, her eyes showing a hint of surprise, but she quickly regained her indifference. She lightly said, and opened the back door to get in the car. I exchanged smiles with her friends and hurried back to the driver's seat. Janie Gill was very quiet the entire ride. So quiet that I almost doubted if anyone was in the car. When I glanced at her through the rearview mirror, I happened to meet her cold gaze. Is this how you usually are? She suddenly asked. Do you smile like that whenever you see a girl? Janie's question caught me off guard. Did I smile just now? No more smiling from now on. If she didn't want me to smile, then I wouldn't. It was such a small request, and I quickly agreed. Because when you smile, you look like someone. She explained again before getting out of the car. The young lady had a gloomy expression, so I quickly put on a serious face. No matter who I resembled, I couldn't lose my job because of this person. That night, just as I lay down in bed, an old classmate I hadn't seen in a long time suddenly sent me a message. I stumbled upon this while looking for information. Could it be a namesake? I carefully looked at the screenshot he sent, which was the cover of a master's thesis from an academic database, and the author was Celia Saunders. The advisor matched too. I hurriedly got up and opened my computer to search frantically. Impossible, Celia had passed away months before graduation. How could she have completed her thesis? Could her advisor have written it for her? I found Celia's advisor's email and wrote an inquiry. After finishing the email, my palms were sweaty. The next day, after dropping off Janie Gill at school, she asked me to go to a luxury store to buy a gift for a friend. Maybe because of how I was dressed. When I stepped into the store Janie specified, not a single sales associate acknowledged me. I mustered the courage to ask the salesgirl where the headbands were, and she casually pointed to a nearby counter. Just as I was about to force a smile to thank her, when I saw her face, all the hair on my body stood on end. Celia Saunders? You're alive? The other person froze for a moment and took a step back, but soon started laughing. Of course I'm alive. You haven't been looking for me all these years. Have you? You actually found me here. Seeing her so nonchalant made my blood rush to my head. You didn't die? Why didn't you see me? Why did you lie to me? Celia sensed the situation was bad and immediately called over the security at the entrance. The young man skillfully grabbed my arm, and when he applied force, I bent down in pain. Did you just want to scam my money? I shouted in agony, but she remained silent. The security guard escorted me out, and I suddenly remembered I hadn't bought Janie's gift yet. Let go of me. I'm here to buy something. Upon hearing this, the security guard hesitated and loosened his grip a bit. Celia looked at me with disdain. Have you paid off your loans? How dare you come here to shop? So she knew everything. She hadn't cared about my well-being at all. I turned to a nearby salesgirl and asked her to wrap the headband Janie wanted to give as a gift. $2,500, sir. The salesgirl said softly. Hearing that price shocked me. How could a headband cost that much? Celia looked at me as if she was watching a joke, while I managed to slip away from the security guard and pulled out Janie's card. The salesgirl took the card and immediately beamed. "You're here to buy for Ms. Gill, right? She's our SVIP customer." "Sir, next time you come, just look for me. We have a VIP lounge." Celia's face turned pale upon hearing SVIP customer, and her smile vanished. The salesgirl and the security guard escorted me to the door, repeatedly apologizing for the unpleasant experience. I glared at Celia with resentment, my heart filled with anger. On the way to drop Janie off at her friend's birthday party, my phone kept ringing. Seeing the girl in the back seat resting with her eyes closed, I decided to turn off my phone. "Someone's looking for you? Seems urgent." Janie suddenly opened her eyes. I knew it was Celia calling because after leaving the mall, I received her friend request on WeChat. "You don't want to be found?" Seeing me turn off my phone, she suddenly seemed interested. Under Janie's persistent questioning, I had no choice but to tell her everything that had happened. "That's good." Good? I felt my life was already a mess, and she was evaluating it as good. Isn't it nice to see a bad person for who they really are? But the cost I've paid is too high. I sighed. "How much do you still owe?" "With principal and interest, I still owe $220,000. The young girl lowered her head to scroll through her phone for a moment, then looked up at me and said, "Turn your phone back on and check. I'll transfer it to you. Pay me back slowly, no interest." "That won't do, Ms. Gill, that's not appropriate," I hurriedly replied. Hearing me call her Ms. Gill, she suddenly burst into laughter, playfully muttering to herself, "Ms. Gill, let's just consider it a way to find some peace." After saying that, she put on the hood of her sweatshirt and closed her eyes again. I knew she wasn't asleep. She just didn't want to hear me make excuses anymore, so I had to keep quiet. I used the money Janie Gill transferred to me to pay off my loan and wrote her an IOU. Although I just changed creditors, I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. Turning around, I bumped into Celia Saunders and her mother getting out of a bright red Mini Cooper. It had been a while since I last saw them. Celia's mother hadn't changed much, still looking well-maintained and radiant. Thinking of my mother's bony hands before she passed away made my teeth clench with anger. "Now you know why I insisted on working as a sales assistant in a luxury store after graduation, right? That's where I can meet wealthy men. My daughter is smart, but are you really sure about this? Elvis Barry had you wrapped around his finger with just one car." "Of course not. Do you think I'm only 18? He needs to prove himself with real skills." "Exactly. That other guy only gave you $500,000 and then disappeared." It turned out I wasn't even worth a name to Celia's mother. "Are you talking about me, Auntie?" I suddenly interrupted their conversation. "You? How did you find me here?" Celia's mother looked at me with disdain. "Did you catch a new big fish? Shouldn't you return my money now? Alvin Harris, are you mistaken? You don't deserve me. I've been with you for years, and I think $500,000 is a loss for me. Celia, you tricked me into not having money to save my mom, and you tricked me into losing my job. Don't you dare put all the blame on me. When you transferred money to me, it was clearly stated for my use. As for everything else, you can only blame yourself for being useless. Right, you can't blame us for being useless. Our Celia is going to marry a CEO. I couldn't believe how shameless this mother-daughter duo was. I was so angry I couldn't speak. I thought you were doing well, but turns out you're just driving for rich families. Just stop bothering me and work honestly to pay off your debts. I clenched my fists, my nails digging painfully into my palms. Suddenly, the sound of a car horn interrupted, and the window of a Porsche Panamera rolled down. "Why haven't you answered my calls?" Janie Gill said, peeking out with a hint of annoyance. "Get in the car." Hearing the young lady's command, I found myself getting into the car involuntarily. The expressions on the faces of the mother and daughter were clearly not pleasant. "Is this yours?" The young lady held the steering wheel with one hand while the other waved a jade pendant in front of my eyes. That was the very pendant my mother had given me before she passed away. I reached into my pocket and, sure enough, the pocket where I kept the pendant was empty. "That's mine. Where did you find it?" I was about to take it back when the young lady tucked the pendant into her pocket. "Are you sure it's yours?" Her voice suddenly choked up. After my mother passed, I had kept that jade pendant with me at all times. I didn't know when I had accidentally dropped it in the car. It was the weekend, and I had planned to ask the young lady if she needed the car. I didn't expect her to ask where I was and then just come driving over. Janie seemed a bit agitated. She wouldn't give me back the jade, and I felt too embarrassed to snatch it back. She parked the car in front of a park and got out. It was slightly chilly, and she stomped her feet to keep warm. I bought a bottle of warm milk from a nearby vendor and handed it to her. But she shook her head in refusal. Well, of course, a wealthy young lady would be particular about what she eats and drinks. It was my mistake to assume otherwise. "I'm lactose intolerant," she explained. "Then hold it to warm your hands." I shoved the warm milk into her hands, wondering if I had upset her in some way. "Don't you want any?" "I don't really drink milk. It makes my stomach upset since I was little." I awkwardly smiled. "Have you noticed that we actually have a lot in common?" Janie suddenly asked. "Lactose intolerant, only one dimple, high nose bridge, double eyelids. If my brother were still alive, he would probably look a lot like you." Janie's expression turned somber. "You have a brother?" Janie nodded and shared a story that no one in the Gill family dared to mention anymore. Janie had a brother named Simon Gill, and they were very close growing up. One year, the whole family went to an amusement park, and Janie realized the jade pendant she always wore was missing. Fearing her parents would scold her, she tearfully told her brother. He excused himself to go to the restroom and went back to the bumper car area to look for it, but he never returned. That night, the Gill family turned the amusement park upside down but couldn't find their child. At first, they thought he had been kidnapped, but after many days, no one contacted them. Back then, there weren't many surveillance devices, and the missing brother became a pain that the family could not mention. Could that pendant be? My heart raced suddenly. Janie nodded. "Right here. Have you been here before?" "Many years ago, it was an amusement park." I suddenly recalled a long-buried memory, the giant dinosaur statue at the amusement park from my childhood. I remembered sleeping on cardboard under the hard seats of a train. I remembered an unfamiliar man speaking words I couldn't understand, slapping me several times. I remembered a woman protecting me, telling me that she would be my mother from then on. The fragmented details of my memories rushed back, and I crouched down, holding my head. After a long time, a pair of warm hands rested on my shoulders. Although I was already 7 years old when I was abducted, the isolated life in the mountain village gradually made me forget the past. After my father passed away, my mother raised me alone, and guilt and anxiety tormented her year after year. She insisted that I go to S-City to find a job, probably hoping I would find my family again. It wasn't until her deathbed that she told me I was not her biological child, and that jade pendant was something I had worn since I was little. After completing the paternity test, I returned to the Gill family with Janie Gill. When my mother saw me, she seemed a bit awkward, repeatedly asking if I had suffered over the years, and as she spoke, her eyes became swollen with tears. When I heard that my adoptive mother had given me everything and insisted on supporting me through college, my mother finally nodded in relief. My father looked especially old, his hair mostly white, and when he heard I had received a 4-year scholarship during college, he murmured, "No wonder you're my son." To make up for the hardships I had endured over the years, my father gave me 10% of the company shares and a large apartment in the city center. Janie paid for a Porsche just like hers for me, but required that I drive her to and from school every day until graduation. Mr. Gill initially wanted me to manage a branch office to gain some experience, but I was afraid I lacked the experience. So I pursued an MBA while finding a frontline position at the group to familiarize myself. It was then that I received an email from Celia Saunders' former mentor. He told me that Celia had encountered a psychopathic ex-boyfriend who, after their breakup, had relentlessly pursued her. She was afraid he would do something outrageous, and it was out of desperation that she came up with such a scheme. asking for the teacher's cooperation. He also mentioned that while the death was a lie, Celia had indeed been diagnosed with thyroid cancer, but her condition was mild and manageable. In the end, the mentor advised me that life is long, to keep an open mind, and not to dwell on my ex-girlfriend after all these years. After reading the email, I was in tears. I never expected that all the tragedies I had faced over the years were orchestrated by Celia herself. If she wanted to break up, I would never have chased after her. If she needed money, I could have lent it to her, but instead, she used the most despicable means to push me into the abyss, forcing me to watch my adoptive mother pass away while I was powerless to help. Celia, oh Celia, your carefree days are probably coming to an end. The Gill family has many businesses, and I chose to intern at their jewelry brand. First, because my field is design, which I could relate to somewhat. Second, because the largest jewelry store owned by the Gill family in S-City is located in the same mall as the luxury goods store where Celia works. I was just a small clerk in the jewelry store, but everyone there knew I was the recently found heir of the Gill family, and they took good care of me. One day, after I sold a pearl necklace, Celia walked in, arm in arm with a beer-bellied man while wearing high heels. She probably already knew I worked there, but she merely glanced at me as if she didn't recognize me. "Which counter has the diamond rings?" she asked casually. I nodded to the other staff, indicating that I would take care of her. "Ms. Saunders, which one do you like?" The man beside her noticed our familiarity and looked at me warily. "Do you know each other?" Ahem. Celia shot me a warning glare, signaling me not to speak out of turn. "He used to be a driver for one of our customers." Upon hearing Celia's explanation, the man chuckled. "That's quite a career leap." I smiled but offered no explanation. "This one is nice. Let me try it on," Celia ordered imperiously. I shrugged. "Sorry. That one was just reserved by another customer." Celia rolled her eyes and picked another ring. "Then how about this one? It can't be reserved too, right?" "Ms. Saunders, a wise choice." I shrugged. Celia turned to the man, clinging to his arm and acting coy. "Honey, I really want that ring." The man immediately put on a stern face. "Call your store manager out here, find out who reserved it, and see if we can cancel it." The store manager hurried over upon hearing the commotion. "I'm sorry, but I'm afraid it can't be canceled, because I just reserved it," I said with a smile. "Alvin Harris, are you insane? How much do you make in a month? You can't even pay off your debts, and you still want to fight me for a ring?" Celia could no longer hold back and started cursing loudly. "Why don't you take a look at this series instead? I won't compete with you." I pointed to the rings in the nearby display case, all of which were custom-made and worth over $1 million. Celia extended her hand, looking down her nose, demanding that I let her try it on. The man leaned in, counted the zeros, and his face showed some discomfort. He roughly grabbed my collar. "You're just a worker. Don't get too carried away." The manager turned pale with fright and hurriedly stepped in to intervene. "Manager," I turned and said, "notify our global stores that these two are our super customers. Make sure to treat them well. If it's not a $1 million custom piece, we won't sell it." "You!" The man raised his fist, ready to strike, but several security guards rushed forward to stop him. "What do you think you are? Do you really think that just because you've got the young lady on your side, it gives you the right to speak?" Celia Saunders shouted. "All right, boss. I'll make a note in the back-end system," the manager said and immediately went to handle it. "You guys!" Celia was so angry her face twisted. Turning to the man beside her, "Elvis Berry, are you just going to stand there and watch your fiancé get bullied?" But with so many people around, the man didn't dare act rashly. "You just wait." He awkwardly wrapped his arms around Celia and left. I had someone look into this Elvis Berry. It turned out he was a second-generation coal tycoon. He had been married once before, but divorced because of Celia's interference. However, in recent years, the mining operations had nearly depleted, and profits were declining. The company wanted to transform and had recently set its sights on a hotel for acquisition. I discreetly leaked that the Gill family was also interested in this hotel, which immediately attracted several competitors. At the auction site, I went with Janie Gill. When Elvis and Celia saw the two of us, their faces were filled with displeasure. At first, we didn't bid, waiting for the other companies to cautiously negotiate. When the price reached $20 million, everyone seemed a bit weary. This was basically the reasonable market price. I slowly raised my paddle. $23 million. The entire room was stunned and turned to look at me. Elvis's face darkened when he saw me call out a price. $24 million. Having suffered from my previous actions, he was naturally emotional, though he couldn't keep his mind calm. $27 million. I called again. Now the room was completely silent. With a 35% premium, anyone with basic math skills knew to stop. $27 million, first time. $27 million, second time. I tilted my head and smiled at Elvis. Celia tugged at Elvis's arm, and he finally spoke up. $27.5 million. I let out a long sigh and whispered to Janie, "You scared me." I was really afraid he wouldn't say anything. Janie linked her arm with mine. "I was worried for you too. I was afraid Dad would hit you." When we encountered Celia and Elvis in the hall, the two were looking quite pleased with themselves. "I underestimated you, Alvin Harris. I didn't expect Ms. Gill to bring you along for everything, giving you plenty of face," Celia mocked. I ignored her and simply reached out to shake Elvis's hand, congratulating him. Just as Elvis was about to gloat, he saw my sincere expression and felt somewhat uncomfortable. "Let's go home." Janie had no interest in pretending to be polite and pulled me away. "She took you home already?" Celia asked. "Otherwise, would I go home with you?" Janie retorted casually. As I turned to wave goodbye to them, I saw Celia nearly biting her lip off. I didn't know what had triggered her, but not long after, Celia and Elvis registered their marriage. Fearing I wouldn't know, she even sent me a photo of it. Since that's the case, I felt relieved. Let the scumbag and the shameless woman be locked away, and don't let them harm others again. "You think I should invite you to my wedding?" When I received Celia's message, I was quite surprised by her thought process. But then I remembered who Celia was, so I thought it wasn't surprising at all that she would do something like that. I was just about to ask where you're treating. Soon, Celia happily sent me her electronic wedding invitation. Of course, I would go and would even prepare her a big gift. On the day of Celia's wedding, the backup dining area was packed with people. When she and Elvis came to toast at our table, Celia's face, which had turned red from drinking, suddenly paled. "Celia, congratulations on your marriage." I raised my glass, and everyone at the table stood up with me. You guys came. It seems you remember everyone, so I don't need to introduce them one by one, right?" Celia glared at me, instantly realizing that this was the ex-boyfriend table, or we could call it the victim table that I had helped her gather. It did take quite a bit of time and effort to find these people. There were middle school classmates, former colleagues, and even people she met during travels. Some were cheated out of their phones, others out of plane tickets, and some out of money. Celia's excuses for dodging were all bizarre: transferring schools, getting sick, going abroad, or even dying. She had mastered this trick. "What do you want?" Celia stepped back and tripped over a beer box on the floor, falling to the ground. "Oh my gosh! What is this?" With a shriek from Mrs. Saunders, everyone turned to look at the big screen. There, one screenshot after another displayed Celia's sweet words and close photos with her various boyfriends, along with evidence of her asking everyone for money. "Turn it off. Quickly turn it off. What kind of nonsense is this?" Mrs. Saunders ran around the banquet hall like a frightened hen, trying to find staff to control the situation. Seeing Elvis's increasingly grim face, Celia hurriedly got up. "Honey, you have to believe me." Elvis looked at the chaotic scene and finally, in a fit of rage, slapped Celia across the face. "It's not like that. It's Alvin Harris trying to frame me." Celia cried out, covering her face in pain. Celia, a voice filled with age came from the corner. I didn't expect you to be this kind of person. Teacher. Celia saw her mentor, who had doted on her back in the day, and despaired as she collapsed onto the ground. Alvin Harris, I solemnly apologize to you for being complicit with Celia in deceiving you without understanding the situation back then. The esteemed old professor gave a deep bow to me. My eyes felt a bit warm. Celia's wedding ended amidst the wailing of an ambulance, and unable to handle the shock, Celia's mother collapsed right in the center of the banquet hall. Guests, who loved to watch the drama unfold, posted chaotic videos from the scene on social media. The topic, luxury brand salesgirl fakes death to cheat boyfriend, then marries a rich second generation, became increasingly heated online. One night, Celia called me in tears. Alvin Harris, I hope you die a horrible death. Now I've lost my job, my marriage is in shambles, and my mom is still in the hospital. You're so despicable. Celia, I took a deep breath. Thanks to you, I've already experienced all of this. Why? I just wanted to live a little easier. Why do you treat me like this? She yelled hysterically. Why? You have countless paths to take. You're so smart, yet you insist on using your intelligence in the wrong way. Of course, you have to pay the price. Don't go too far. Celia threatened, then hung up the phone. I still underestimated Celia's shamelessness. A few days later, our company's all-staff email received an anonymous letter. The letter accused driver Alvin Harris of using his position to gain power, getting close to the young lady of the Gill family, and abusing his authority across multiple business lines under the protection of the sole heir, Janie Gill. Mr. Gill saw the letter and called me and Janie Gill to his office. Have you been attending your MBA classes properly? Mr. Gill didn't mention the letter but simply asked if I was studying well. Of course, isn't Director Coleman your old classmate? You can ask him. I've been performing very well. Mr. Gill nodded. I heard you played that Barry kid a trick? It seemed he knew everything. I stole a glance at Janie Gill, who immediately shrugged her shoulders, indicating it wasn't her who reported me. Yes. I immediately answered honestly, not bothering to explain further. Mr. Gill suddenly laughed. Just consider it practice, you're still a bit too mild-mannered. Mr. Gill's words left me puzzled. After all, it had been more than 10 years since I left. I had no idea what kind of person my father was. But it's time to officially reveal your identity. Mr. Gill casually reminded us a few more things before letting us leave. That anonymous letter didn't cause a single ripple. Months later, 2 explosive news stories appeared simultaneously in the newspapers. The Gill family had found the heir who was kidnapped by traffickers many years ago. Elvis Berry's company was on the brink of bankruptcy due to a massive debt crisis. Elvis Berry's cash flow was already poor. After overpaying for a hotel, the operational results were subpar, quickly dragging the entire company down. Elvis had been seeking to sell assets to survive. Perhaps cornered, he even called me without any regard. The hotel you've been thinking about, $25 million to let go. I know Celia is your ex-girlfriend you can't let go of. If you want to rekindle your romance, I can send her to your bed. Elvis was even more shameless than I had imagined. To escape his predicament, he was willing to use his own wife as part of the deal. I scoffed. Mr. Berry, your company's evaluation team should be fired entirely. That hotel's market price is only $20 million. And since you're in a hurry to sell, you might need to lower your asking price even more. Elvis seemed to come to his senses. Are you raising my price? If we're talking about being shrewd, you really should learn from your calculating wife. Elvis angrily hung up the phone. I finally understood why Celia chose to marry Elvis. She was truly naive and easy to deceive, but soon it would only be naive and easy to deceive. I left the company early that afternoon. Just as I was about to pick up Janie Gill from school, I ran into Celia downstairs at the company. I'm sorry, I misunderstood you. I didn't know you and Janie Gill were siblings. I thought you were trying to seduce her. Celia said timidly. What? Are you here to apologize for the anonymous letter? Celia looked a bit embarrassed. Why didn't you tell me your true identity sooner? You see, many things in the past were misunderstandings. Misunderstandings. If I were to mention Celia's strengths, aside from being calculating, having thick skin could also be considered one. Thanks to you, if you hadn't harmed me so badly, I wouldn't have met the Gill family so quickly, I retorted sarcastically. Then, since I also contributed, can you help me out? I was truly amused by Celia's audacity. Was this even a reasonable request? How can I help? You could take the opportunity to acquire Elvis Berry's assets at a low price. This way, his debt problem would be solved, and I could divorce him without taking a penny of his debt. It's a win-win-win result. As she spoke, Celia leaned closer, wrapping her arm around mine. I pulled my hand back in disgust. This couple was indeed a perfect example of abandoning each other in times of crisis, calculating everything about one another down to the last detail. I can't help you, mainly, I don't want to, right? Seeing me walk out only to turn back, Celia Saunders' eyes sparkled again. Don't come looking for me anymore. Have a bit of self-awareness. Tears immediately welled up in Celia's eyes. After the heir's identity was made public, Mr. Gill, to show his support for me, handed over the entire jewelry company under his name for me to manage. During my school years, I had followed several uniquely styled young designers because of my love for design. After taking over the jewelry company, I invited these young designers to create a series of innovations and cross-industry collaborations. We launched a more exaggerated, youthful, and affordable sub-brand to cater to the market. The results far exceeded my expectations. The growth of the sub-brand directly surpassed that of the main brand and even attracted some foreign brands to imitate us. We also took the opportunity to expand our business into fragrance and home products. These products quickly dominated the social media of young girls. This series of successes completely cleared the obstacles within the company for me, and the elders recognized me as the heir. After returning from a design exhibition in France, I took Janie Gill out for a meal. In my own apartment, I personally cooked a simple fried rice dish. Bro, I have to say, your fried rice skills are good enough to open a small diner. She flattered me with a smile. I ruffled her hair. I called you here today because I want to share some heartfelt words. I know you've felt guilty over the years. If you hadn't lost the jade pendant back then, you wouldn't have lost me. Janie's eyes instantly turned as red as a rabbit's. I knew she felt guilty, regretful, and self-reproachful, but she kept it all bottled up inside. Just like when I first met her, she was always cold, used to locking herself in her own world. When I was young, I went through a lot, but those hardships weren't in vain. Look, my fried rice is pretty good, right? Janie forced a sad smile. I don't blame you anymore. You shouldn't blame yourself either. Upon hearing my words, Janie could no longer hold it in and began to cry like a wronged child. I gently patted her back, helping her calm down. But I want to ask you a heartfelt question. Now that I'm back in the Gill family, do you feel like I've taken away your opportunities? How could that be? I originally thought that if I lost you, I would have to spend my whole life working for the Gill family. When you came back, I finally felt relieved. Seeing Janie smile through her tears, I finally felt at ease, and the bond of siblinghood returned to my memory. After finishing the monthly business meeting, I casually took a couple of bites of food when I noticed that Janie had sent me a live stream link. When I clicked in, I discovered that the female host was Celia Saunders. In the live stream room with over 20 visitors, Celia was energetically selling secondhand items. Secondhand bags, secondhand cars, secondhand clothes, and even secondhand shoes that were starting to peel. If you like any of these, feel free to bid. These shoes originally cost $5,800, and you can get them for $5,000 now. Look at their condition. They're still about 90% new, hardly worn. The comments were filled with insults. Oh my God! Have they lost their minds? 90% new? This is practically a damaged version. This out-of-season style is only over 1,000 brand new at the outlet. Don't fall for this trick. Seeing the comments, Celia immediately broke down and started cursing back. You don't understand. This is a limited edition. You ignorant people. Do you know what limited edition means? Where's the damage? Who doesn't have a few minor flaws in secondhand items? If you can't afford it, just leave. The comments section exploded with insults. I've seen poor before, but never poor and malicious. If you understand it, keep it to yourself. Don't bring it out to embarrass yourself. Celia was so insulted that she shut down the live stream. It seemed that Elvis Berry's company was probably in dire straits, relying on his wife to sell secondhand goods. Later, when I went to inspect the stores, I ran into Celia again. It was as if she was waiting for me. As soon as she saw me, she ran over. But after not seeing her for a long time, her complexion was pale, and her eyes were sunken. I didn't recognize her at first. Alvin Harris. Oh no, I should be calling you Mr. Gill now, right? Please help me. I'm dying. As she spoke, she rummaged through her bag, which I couldn't see the color of, and pulled out a diagnosis report. Thyroid cancer, late stage. Are you trying to fool me again? Celia immediately grabbed my hand tightly. No, this time it's real. For the sake of our past, for the love we once had, please save me. I really want to live. Celia, if I remember correctly, you still owe me $500,000, right? The security guard saw the situation and rushed over to pry her hands away. Celia desperately tried to hold on to me, as if I were her last lifeline. She broke free from the guard's grip, lunged forward, but lost her balance and fell to the ground, hitting her nose and bleeding all over her face. The guard quickly stepped forward to grab her hand and dragged her away without hesitation. Later, I heard rumors that Elvis had sold off the villa and car, selling everything he could, yet still ended up owing tens of millions in debt. He and Celia Saunders rented a shabby house in a village on the outskirts of the city, but they were still found by the creditors demanding repayment. Later, it was unclear how Elvis Berry managed to escape the creditors' surveillance, but he just ran away. He left behind his wife, who faced various acts of violence every day. The creditors, unable to collect any money, stopped chasing after them every few days. They only came back every few months to check if Elvis had returned. A few months later, when the debt collectors came knocking again, a terrible stench overwhelmed them, making them reluctant to enter the house. The forensic examination revealed that the deceased had suffered from a malignant tumor and died due to a lack of effective treatment. I quickly glanced at a small section of the newspaper regarding the investigation of the deceased, then folded the paper and tossed it aside. It was then that I noticed the girl sitting next to me in first class on the plane was wearing the tail ring I designed. Seeing me staring at the ring in a daze, she raised her hand and smiled at me. Is it pretty? It's from a design brand I really like. I love the little crown design on it. It always makes me feel like I'm my own queen. The girl finished speaking and laughed cheerfully. I returned her smile, took out a pen and paper, and began sketching the ideas that were forming in my mind. As the plane began to descend, I wrote down the theme for the next season's new collection on the drawing. My queen.